Shalom. I am Rabbi Nathan Davidovich, speaking to you on behalf of the webyeshiva.org, speaking to you from Efrat, Israel. This Shabbat is called Shabbat Chazon. It is called Shabbat Chazon because of the Haftorah, the section of the prophets that are read on this Shabbat. This Shabbat we read from the prophet Yeshayahu from Isaiah, the beginning verses of the book of Isaiah. This particular Haftorah, and this particular Shabbat, is read if, God forbid, Moshiach doesn't come before this Saturday night. If Moshiach doesn't come before this Saturday night, we go into Tisha B'Av, the national day of tragedy and fasting of the Jewish people for the holy temples in Jerusalem that were destroyed. Our sages tell us that the temple, the second temple, second base of Mikdash, was destroyed because of sinas chinam, because of baseless hatred. As we go into Tisha B'Av, we need to ask ourselves, what are we doing? What are we mourning for? And how can we repair what was done? So the prophet Isaiah, in the opening words of the Haftorah, says as follows. He says, Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amos. The vision of the prophet Yeshayahu that he saw about Jerusalem. He says, Shimu Shemaya Bahazinu Eretz, listen, O heavens, and hear the earth. Ki Hashem Diber, God is talking to you. And he says, Banim Godalti Vromamti. I grew children, my children, the children of Israel, and I made them in a high place. I did all kinds of miracles for them. Behem Pashubi, and they've sinned against me. And he's talking about the various sins that children of Israel did. He mentions that, you know, animals know who their master is and follow the will of their master. We, children of Israel, he says, have not followed the will of our master. What do we learn from this? First of all, we have to put into perspective what this holiday is about. I call it a holiday, even though it's a fast day. Why do I do that? Because the sages tell us that at the time the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, when the Holy Temple was destroyed, the Keruvim, the cherubim were which normally spread their wings and were looking the other way, were embraced in each other, showing God's love for the children of Israel, even in the midst of the destruction of the house of God, the temple of God. We are not mourning for something that happened in the past. Rather, we are mourning for why we ourselves have not rebuilt the Beis Hamikdash in our day. How do we rebuild the Holy Temple? This is not a question of brick and mortar. That's not how to rebuild it. We need to rebuild it by doing the opposite of what led to its destruction. Doing the opposite of sinas chinam, doing the opposite of baseless hating, and instead turning it into loving somebody because we are all children of God. In the sentence that I quoted, that I've raised children, the sages tell us that no matter what the children of Israel have done, we're still God's children, and God is our Father. And as our Father, He will not cast us away. He will always be there to answer our prayers. The sages tell us that the destruction of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem and the ultimate observance of Tisha B'Av will ultimately lead to a time when Tisha B'Av will be not a fast day, but will be a holiday. And that's why in my initial comments I mentioned the holiday of Tisha B'Av rather than the commemoration of the fast day of Tisha B'Av. It will be a holiday because what we need to bring about the total redemption is to reverse the hatred that we showed to one another, to replace it with the recognition that we are God's children. Bani matem Lashem, we are children to God. And Rameir says, Ben kach uben kach nikro banim. Regardless of what we do, we are still called children of God. This Shabbos, which is Shabbat Chazon, is a light in the darkness. Before Tisha B'Av, we have gone through a period of 3 weeks of mourning, with the mourning getting more intense as we go through it. But Shabbos, mourning is prohibited. Shabbos is like a light in the darkness. Shabbos is the hidden light that God has hidden away from us for only the righteous people to bring to the children of Israel on Shabbos, because God has made a covenant with us. The sages say that this Shabbos Chazon, is the greatest of the Shabbosim of the world of the year, because in this Shabbos, part of the message of Yeshayahu and part of the message of what Tisha B'Av is about is that we can find God close to us and call upon Him. We can call upon God through our tears, and our tears should be not for what we have not done before, but what we are not doing right now to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. Let's get away from baseless hatred. Let's replace it with love and respect for one another. We are not living in a time where we can afford to keep going the way we are. And we should never be satisfied with what we have. We should always know that we can do better. The Gemara talks about an incident where this hatred, baseless hatred, was evident, where somebody was told to invite a friend to a wedding, and instead there was another person with a similar name who came, and he basically threw the person out, embarrassing him in front of everybody, even though the mistaken person who came there was uh, willing to pay for the entire wedding. And nonetheless, his hatred was so great that he kicked him out. This was the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. That led to the destruction of the temple. And the sad part about that, one of the sad parts about it, is that at that wedding were many prominent rabbis, and nobody protested. We are all supposed to be on the level of Kohanim, a priest, to spread the word of God to the world, word of peace, the word of shalom. I bless us all that we shouldn't go into Tisha B'Av at all, but if we have to do it, that we learn a lesson from it and learn how we can improve our relationship with our fellow man so that we can improve our relationship with God, who will then enable us to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. Thank you for listening on behalf of the webyeshiva.org. Shabbat Shalom.